Hello, everybody, and welcome to Grey History. As we speak, I am up to my eyeballs in research for what is going to be a crazy few episodes. In the aftermath of the assassination of Jean-Paul Marat, we're going to see the outbreak of all-out war. Not foreign war, not civil war, but instead a new factional struggle to lead the revolutionary left. Alongside the rise of Jacques Hébert and the resurgence of the enraged ones, we'll also witness Robespierre's ascension to the Committee of Public Safety, as well as Danton's removal. But, perhaps most interestingly, we're also on the precipice of the last successful day of action of the sans-culotte movement. So, to say that the agenda is packed is an understatement, and as such, I'm deep in French sources trying to figure out how best to bring you the fascinating mess that is Paris in mid-1793. As such, while I wade through the translations and the controversies, I thought now would be a great time to reintroduce another great history podcast called History Daily. History Daily tells the fascinating stories of what happened on this day in history. In bite-sized episodes, 5 times a week, host Lindsay Graham takes you back in time to explore momentous events. From politics to sport, famous battles to fashion firsts, the show covers a range of human history in surprising and approachable ways. Now, as this is a French Revolution podcast, you're about to hear 2 episodes relating to French revolutionary history. The first focuses on King Louis XIV's rise to the French throne, and the second explores how Britain gained control of Gibraltar. Given the legacy of both Louis XIV and Gibraltar's capture, I thought these episodes would be the perfect taste of History Daily. But before we begin, a quick reminder that episode 75, The Death of Marat, is already available for those community members with early access. If you're not part of the greatest club on earth, then please support the show by donating just a cup of coffee when main narrative episodes are first released. There's tons of exclusive bonus content and other fantastic perks, and I would be eternally grateful for your sponsorship of the show. So, if you want more Grey history, both now and in the future, please support the show today. Anyway, that's enough from me, so let's get into it.
It's May 14th, 1643, at a royal residence near Paris, France. Queen Anne snaps awake at the sound of church bells in the distance. Takes a moment for the 43-year-old to remember where she is, sitting in a chair next to the bed of her husband, King Louis XIII of France. Although Louis is 2 years younger than Anne, his health is failing, and doctors have predicted that his death is imminent. Anne has sat in vigil by Louis's bed for days, but she's so exhausted she must have drifted off to sleep. Anne has more to worry about than just her husband's illness. Their eldest child, who is also named Louis, is next in line to the throne, but he's only 4 years old. And this is not a time for a boy king. France is nearly out of money, and the country's nobles have spent the last few decades either fighting among themselves or quarreling with the king. It's such an unstable situation that Anne fears an ambitious noble will attempt to seize the throne after her husband is gone. She dips a cloth in a bowl of water and holds it to King Louis's forehead. It seems to revive him a little. He mutters weakly and lifts his head off the bed as though grasping for something. Anne puts her ear close to his mouth to make out his words. He's asking for his sword. Anne smiles sadly and strokes Louis's forehead. Her husband has no need for a weapon now, but Anne fears her son might soon. Later that day, King Louis XIII takes his final breath. Anne has little time to grieve. She immediately leaves the deathbed and assembles the court in the chambers of her young son. There, with France's fractious nobles as her witnesses, she proclaims the 4-year-old as France's new ruler, Louis XIV. Although he ascends to the throne in difficult circumstances, the new King Louis will rule for 72 years, and his reign will transform France into the most powerful kingdom in Europe. Louis will go down in history as the renowned Sun King, a spectacular achievement considering his shaky grip on power when he became King of France as a 4-year-old on May 14, 1643. From Noiser and Airship, I'm Lindsay Graham, and this is History Daily. History is made every day. On this podcast, every day, we tell the true stories of the people and events that shaped our world. Today is May 14, 1643. Louis XIV becomes King of France. It's near midnight on February 9, 1651, in the Palais Royal in central Paris, 8 years after the death of King Louis XIII. France's current king, the now 12-year-old Louis XIV, hurries into his chambers and climbs into a grand 4-poster bed. A servant follows and pulls the sheets up to Louis's neck. But this is no ordinary bedtime. Louis's wide eyes watch as the servant snuffs out all but a single candle. Then the man rushes across the room to a side chamber and disappears out of sight. And just as the servant exits, the door to Louis's bedchamber flings open, and Louis closes his eyes, pretending to be asleep, but he is petrified. Louis is convinced he's about to be killed. For the last 8 years, France has been ruled in Louis's name by a regent, his mother Anne, with the help of her chief minister, Cardinal Mazarin. Anne and Mazarin made it their mission to replenish the royal treasury, which was almost empty when Louis came to the throne. To do this, they raised taxes to unprecedented levels, but that made the monarchy deeply unpopular. And earlier tonight, the growing unrest in Paris spread right to the king's doorstep. Rioters overpowered guards and stormed into the royal palace, where they demanded an audience with the young king. The terrified Louis ran away to his bed in belief that the rioters wouldn't dare enter his private chambers. But he was wrong. Now, shivering beneath the sheets, Louis keeps his eyes shut but listens carefully. Heavy, booted footsteps move around the king's bedside. There are gruff voices and uncertain whispers. Louis can sense someone leaning over him, the warmth of a man's breath on his cheek. Louis concentrates on breathing deeply as though he's sleeping. He tries to keep his trembling body still, and after a moment, the figure retreats, the footsteps fade, and the bedchamber door closes. After the rioters leave, Louis learns that they had no intention of killing him. Instead, they only wanted proof that he's still alive. As rumors were circulating in Paris that Anne and Mazarin had seized the throne for themselves. But although these rioters had no murderous intentions toward Louis, the incident still leaves a mark on the young king. For the rest of his reign, he will carry a deep mistrust of Parisians, and he will become determined to ensure that his life is never at the mercy of a mob again. It's March 1661 in Paris, 10 years after rioters broke into the Palais Royal. Now 22 years old, Louis summons the country's most powerful courtiers and noblemen to his throne room. Anticipation crackles in the air as they await a royal proclamation. A few days ago, France's chief minister, Cardinal Mazarin, died. Now everyone wants to know who Louis will name as Mazarin's successor. But when the decree is read out, it stuns the assembled courtiers. Louis isn't naming a chief minister at all, he is personally taking the reins of government. Louis has spent the last 18 years being groomed to rule by various tutors and advisors. He's studied French history, and he's concluded that for centuries, French nobles have restricted the power of the monarchy to serve their own interests. For Louis, taking charge of the country himself is the best way to secure the future of his royal line. Although Louis's announcement comes as a surprise to many, he soon proves up to the task of leading the kingdom. He increases the power of the monarchy and reforms taxation, swelling the royal treasury without creating the same unrest that his mother and Cardinal Mazarin did. But next, Louis must decide what to spend his money on, and his eye soon settles on a hunting lodge built by his father at Versailles, 12 miles west of Paris. Louis has always enjoyed hunting parties at Versailles, but more than anything, it's the location that appeals to him. Versailles is further away from Paris than his other royal houses, and ever since rioters broke into his bedchamber that night when he was a child, Louis has tried to put distance between himself and the potentially rebellious capital of Paris. With the perfect location in mind and plenty of cash on hand, Louis will order France's finest builders to Versailles. There they will transform the old hunting lodge into a royal palace so grand in scale that it will come to define King Louis's entire reign. It's summer 1678 at Versailles near Paris, 14 years after construction began on a new royal palace. 32-year-old architect Jules Ardouin-Mansart walks into a derelict room where a team of laborers is attacking a stone wall with sledgehammers. Jules nods his approval. This is just one of many walls that needs to come down for Jules' spectacular vision to become reality. Versailles has changed beyond recognition since work began. Laborers have shifted thousands of tons of earth to flatten the ground. They've diverted rivers and cut down forests. And after more than a decade of work, the old hunting lodge has been enveloped by 3 grand new wings. Surrounding this palace are carefully manicured lawns, towering hedgerows, and spectacular fountains. Last year, Jules was appointed as the king's architect, with orders to begin the next and most important phase of construction, renovating the original hunting lodge to make it the centerpiece of the palace by installing something called the Hall of Mirrors, a grand gallery with wide windows overlooking the gardens on one side and mirrors made by skilled Venetian craftsmen on the other. But as the Hall of Mirrors goes up, France is rocked by a scandal. In 1679, midwife Catherine de Chaise is arrested and charged with being a poisoner. Upon interrogation, Catherine incriminates several important courtiers who've used her services to kill their rivals. Some of the accused are wives of high-ranking nobles, and one is even the king's own mistress. This scandal becomes known as the Affair of the Poisons, and it sends shockwaves through French society. But no one is more outraged than Louis XIV, since the investigation reveals that even he himself was a target of attempted poisonings. The Affair of the Poisons ends with Catherine and 35 other suspects being executed. It also spurs Louis to take his out-of-control nobles to task. In 1682, he officially relocates the royal court from Paris to Versailles, and Louis makes sure he isn't the only one who moves into the new palace. He insists that his nobles and courtiers reside with him at Versailles rather than in their own homes. Housing the nobility under one roof means that Louis can keep potential rivals under constant surveillance. Royal officials intercept their mail. Palace staff listen in on their conversations. But few have the time to plot and scheme, since daily life at the new palace is dominated by a highly regimented timetable of royal rituals. Soon, Louis becomes known as the Sun King because he's the person everything else revolves around. But although Louis cleverly puts an end to his nobles' squabbles and plotting, he soon becomes caught up in an international conspiracy of his own. In 1700, the childless King of Spain falls ill, and just before the king dies, he bequeaths his crown to Louis's grandson, Philip. This is a huge prize for Louis. The Spanish throne doesn't just bring control of Spain itself, but also the vast Spanish Empire that covers parts of Italy, the Netherlands, and the Americas. But before Philip can accept the Spanish crown, Louis faces a tough decision. Prior to the Spanish king's deathbed proposal, Louis had already agreed to split the Spanish Empire between his family and that of the Holy Roman Emperor, who rules much of Central Europe. If Louis goes against his word and allows his royal house to seize the Spanish Empire in its entirety, the Holy Roman Empire will likely declare war. But the prospect of uniting the thrones of Spain and France under one family is too enticing. Louis backs the claim of his grandson to rule all of the Spanish Empire, and Philip is soon crowned King Philip V of Spain. As expected, Louis's decision angers others in Europe, and not just the Holy Roman Emperor. He is joined in a grand alliance against Louis by England and the Dutch Republic, and soon Europe is at war. This conflict will threaten Louis's grip on France for the first time since he came to the throne 60 years earlier. The Grand Alliance will invade France, and the country will fall into a panic as enemy armies advance on Versailles, intent on bringing an end to the long reign of the Sun King, Louis XIV. It's early on July 24, 1712, near the village of Denain in France, 12 years after the War of the Spanish Succession began. His legs aching, French General Claude de Villars continues climbing to the top of a windmill. General de Villars is 59 years old, and he feels like an old man as he slogs up the steep wooden stairway. But he's here at the crack of dawn to get a bird's-eye view of the landscape because it's in this countryside that his army is about to make a last stand. After suffering a number of defeats, the French army has been powerless to stop a combined Dutch and Austrian force from marching into northern France and ransacking French towns. Now the invaders have occupied the village of Denain, only 130 miles from Versailles, and it's General de Villars' job to stop them before they reach the royal palace and depose King Louis XIV. General de Villars reaches the top of the stairway, catches his breath, and then steps onto a balcony. From here, he has an excellent view of the surrounding terrain and quickly decides on a battle plan. He can see several bridges over a nearby river that he identifies as crucial points to seize before his enemy begins its counterattack. So over the next few hours, French troops carefully and silently take the bridges before moving into the village of Denain in a surprise attack. The Austrian and Dutch soldiers are pushed out of the village, but as they now can't use the bridges to move across the river, they have only one way to go, back towards the border and away from Versailles. The Battle of Denain marks the first French victory for years, and it's a critical one. King Louis XIV and the Palace of Versailles are no longer under threat. 2 years after this battle, the War of the Spanish Succession comes to an end with a negotiated settlement that allows King Philip of Spain to remain on the throne. It's a significant victory for Louis XIV, considering how close he came to losing the war. But Louis will not live to enjoy his success for long. He will die the following year at the age of 76, after more than 7 decades on the throne. Louis will outlive his eldest son and his grandson, meaning that on his death the crown will skip 2 generations. Louis will be succeeded by his 5-year-old great-grandson, putting a child on the throne again, just like 72 years earlier, when Louis XIV became King of France at the age of 4 on May 14, 1643. Next on History Daily, May 15, 1940, 2 brothers open a tiny barbecue restaurant in San Bernardino, California. Naming it after themselves, they call it McDonald's. From Noiser and Airship, this is History Daily, hosted, edited, and executive produced by me, Lindsay Graham. Audio editing by Mohammed Shazib. Sound design by Gabriel Gould. Music by Thrum. This episode is written and researched by Scott Reeves. Edited by Dorian Marina. Managing producer Emily Burke. Executive producers are William Simpson for Airship and Pascal Hughes for Noiser.
I hope you enjoyed that History Daily episode on the ascension of King Louis XIV. In the next episode, Lindsay Graham will explore the surprising events which saw Britain seize Gibraltar. Enjoy.
It's November 1st, 1700 in Madrid, the capital of the Spanish Empire. King Charles II of Spain is lying on his bed. Barely able to move, eat, or string a sentence together, Charles is close to death. As the king sputters and shakes, a doctor comes into his room and attempts to give Charles some water. But even this simple task proves tricky for Charles, who fails to get the drink down before exploding into another coughing fit. As Charles lurches forward in pain, he suddenly flashes into a seizure. These have become common for the king, but this episode is especially bad. As the seizure comes to an abrupt halt, the king's body crashes down on the bed where it remains motionless. His doctors rush forward and surround the bedside, but there's nothing they can do. King Charles II of Spain is dead. The king's death will come after a lifelong battle with poor health. Charles's many ailments have not only affected his ability to rule, but also to produce an heir for the Habsburg dynasty, which has ruled Spain and its territories for almost 2 centuries. Shortly before his death, and without any children of his own, Charles decided to name the French royal Philippe of Anjou as his heir. This has proved an unpopular choice among Europe's major powers, who are angered by the prospect of an already prominent French Empire growing even stronger. Their frustrations will boil over in 2 weeks' time when Philippe is pronounced King of Spain, sparking a succession crisis that will explode into a conflict known as the War of Spanish Succession. For years, fighting will drag on all over Europe, but within the bloodshed, Britain will find a golden opportunity to build and showcase its strength by capturing the Spanish-held bastion of Gibraltar on August 4, 1704. From Noiser and Airship, I'm Lindsay Graham, and this is History Daily. History is made every day. On this podcast, every day, we tell the true stories of the people and events that shaped our world. Today is August 4th, 1704. Britain takes control of Gibraltar. It's the morning of October 23rd, 1702, off the coast of northwestern Spain, almost 1 year into the War of Spanish Succession. Commander-in-Chief of the British Naval Fleet, Admiral George Rooke, stands resolute on the quarterdeck of his flagship as the first rays of dawn pierce the gray morning fog. The salty wind tugs at his weather-beaten tricorn hat and whips his naval coat around his sturdy frame. He has faced many a storm in his naval career, but the battle ahead promises to be a tempest of a different sort. Since Charles II's death, war has consumed Europe. Worried that allowing a French royal to rule Spain would upset the continent's balance of power, Britain, the Dutch Republic, the Holy Roman Empire, and several lesser powers banded together into a contingent called the Grand Alliance. Last year, after the Spanish rejected attempts to resolve the issue of Charles II's succession through diplomatic means, the Grand Alliance declared war on France and Spain. Since then, the Franco-Spanish alliance has been joined by the Portuguese, who also maintain that Philippe of Anjou is Spain's rightful king. Now, just north of the Portuguese border, Admiral Rooke and his Anglo-Dutch fleet are headed for the rocky Spanish shoreline, ready for another maritime battle to commence. Their decks bustle with men scrubbing the planks, loading cannons, and sharpening their cutlasses, pre-battle rituals performed with a tense, hushed urgency. Today, they face a daunting mission to intercept a heavily fortified Franco-Spanish treasure fleet laden with riches from the Americas. The wealth is intended for overland transport to France, but word of the loot has reached the Anglo-Dutch alliance, who are eager for both the silver and the opportunity to deliver a crippling blow to their enemies. But the Spanish and French are ready for them. As Admiral Rooke leads his ships into Spain's Vigo Bay, gunfire begins to rain down from forts on shore, and the fleet is halted by an unexpected barrier. A blockade constructed of ship's masts is anchored across the water, preventing the enemy fleet from sailing through and forming an obstacle known as a boom line. If he wants to get to the treasure on the other side, Admiral Rooke has only one option. He must destroy the boom line. With a strong wind behind him, Admiral Rooke sends one of his ships to crash into the blockade. He watches on as the boat rushes into the defensive line, breaking through it and sailing head-on for the fleet that awaits in the dock beyond. But as the ship surges forward, 2 enemy vessels rush to stop it. Battle breaks out, and the bay echoes with the deafening roar of cannon fire. The rest of the British and Dutch warships try to come to its aid, rushing toward the boom line. But the wind is no longer on their side, and they struggle to break through. As they flounder, the British ship on the other side is left to fend for itself. Desperate to crush the enemy vessel, the French and Spanish send out a surplus ship filled with explosives toward the lone British vessel. As it nears its target, the ship explodes, pummeling the British ship with fiery wooden smithereens and setting it alight. As the crew battles the blaze, their British and Dutch comrades try even harder to break through the boom line. And soon, nature is on their side again. As the wind picks up again, the rest of the fleet are able to use its strength to form new breaches in the blockade. And slowly but surely, Anglo-Dutch forces fill the harbor and the seas erupt into a maelstrom of chaos and violence. In the midst of the frenzy, Admiral Rooke stands unwavering, his gaze locked on the unfolding battle, evaluating each firing of a cannon, each splintering crash of wood, and each shout from his men. As the Battle of Vigo Bay gets underway, Its echoes will resound across the churning waters, heralding a conflict whose outcome will help shape the future of Europe. As night falls, resistance from the Franco-Spanish fleet will dwindle, and by morning, the treasure ships will be sunk and the engagement will be over. The conflict will come to be seen as a catastrophic loss for France and Spain, one that will give Admiral Rooke the upper hand in the battle for the seas and change the tide of the war. Following this defeat, Portugal's king will sever his ties with the French and Spanish and join the Grand Alliance. Thereafter, Portugal's capital, Lisbon, will become Admiral Rooke's new base of operation, providing him with a direct line to a vital next target, Gibraltar. It's August 1st, 1704, almost 2 years after the Battle of Vigo Bay. Admiral George Rooke is back aboard his flagship, but this time he and his fleet of 22 vessels are lined up along the edge of Gibraltar, a town located at the foot of the Iberian Peninsula in southern Spain. Admiral Rooke squints at the formidable fortress that looms ahead. In the distance, the Rock of Gibraltar, a gargantuan limestone ridge, juts out from the mainland, standing guard over the strait at an imposing height of 1,400 feet. The Spanish fortifications that adorn it, though relatively meager, are still a daunting sight. But with victory at Vigo Bay and a boost of Portuguese support behind them, the morale of the Grand Alliance is high, making them primed and ready to attack. The Strait of Gibraltar is an essential piece in the larger chessboard of the war. A key naval gateway between the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea, its strategic importance seems unquestionable. Whoever controls Gibraltar controls naval access to the Mediterranean. And after the war, this will be a key trade advantage. But within the conflict, there's another benefit. If the Allied forces can capture Gibraltar, they will have a strategic base for further attacks on the Franco-Spanish fleets stationed in the Mediterranean, and they will be able to open up fronts on multiple sides of France and Spain. Admiral Rooke was initially reluctant to try to seize Gibraltar, doubting his chances of success. But the peninsula's rough terrain makes it difficult to build and keep a garrison there. So despite the area's tactical significance, Gibraltar is not that well defended. In fact, it's been largely neglected by the Spanish, who have failed to recognize the full value of the small peninsula. As the Anglo-Dutch fleet draws nearer to the coastline, it's apparent that the military fortifications upon it have been weakened by years of disuse. But attacking the peninsula still will not be an easy task. Its steep sea cliffs, tricky ocean currents, and soft, sandy beaches will make any approach difficult. But Captain Rooke has no plans of backing down. He has an audacious yet simple plan: a maritime bombardment by the Anglo-Dutch fleet to soften the defenses, followed by an amphibious assault to capture the city. As they prepare for their attack, Admiral Rooke's fleet buzzes with barely suppressed energy. Amid the clatter of the rigging and the dull thud of the sea against the hulls, Admiral Rooke's men move at a frenzied yet deliberate pace as cannons are loaded, weapons are readied, and prayers are whispered. Then, upon the Admiral's signal, they eagerly set their commander's plan into action. The fleet's cannons roar to life and the bombardment begins. For 3 days, the Anglo-Dutch fleet relentlessly hammers Gibraltar's fortifications. But despite being vastly outnumbered and outgunned, the Spanish garrison and a small civilian militia refuses to surrender. So on the morning of August 3rd, Admiral Rooke decides to intensify his efforts, firing tens of thousands of shells into the Spaniards' already battered defenses. By the end of their assault, the dust of battle hangs like a death shroud over the peninsula. But through this gloomy pall, Admiral Rooke can see the testament of their efforts. With the Spanish forts clearly crumbling, Admiral Rooke launches a ground assault, ready to use their superior numbers to strangle the city into surrender. As his men storm the peninsula, they effectively and efficiently overtake its small defenses, and before long, white flags appear across the town. Without any reinforcements to speak of, the following day of August 4th, Gibraltar's governor formally surrenders, handing control to British forces. As a Union Jack is hoisted over Gibraltar, Admiral Rooke lets out a sigh of relief. This was his fleet's first amphibious assault, and the largest one ever attempted by a British force up to this point. He's grateful that their ambitious plan paid off. Soon he will have to turn his attention to the fights ahead. But for now, Admiral Rooke allows himself a moment of satisfaction, gazing at the Rock of Gibraltar, which now stands tall as a potent symbol of Britain's naval strength. With its capture, the Mediterranean gateway is open and the balance of power shifts, paving the way for Britain's future naval dominance. But unfortunately for Admiral Rooke, he will never get to know the full significance of his success. It's January 24th, 1709, in Canterbury in the southeast of England. Inside his home, Admiral George Rooke lays in bed in intense pain, suffering severely from gout. Over the last few years, the Admiral's ailing health has forced the decorated sailor to withdraw from naval action. But his victories at Vigo Bay and in Gibraltar have been enough to solidify his legacy as a British naval hero, having tipped the balance in power in favor of Britain and its allies. With Gibraltar secured, the Grand Alliance was able to strengthen their control on the Mediterranean, while deeply loosening France and Spain's grip on the region. Upon realizing just how important Gibraltar was to them, Franco-Spanish forces have attempted to retake the peninsula, but they have been continually repelled by Anglo-Dutch forces. But now, as he awaits death, Admiral Rooke worries that the tides of war are changing yet again. After capturing Gibraltar, the Grand Alliance capitalized on their victory by taking parts of eastern Spain shortly after. But the last 2 years have seen Franco-Spanish forces recapture much of this territory, leading to a stalemate on the Spanish fronts that Britain has not been able to break. The news deeply disturbs the Admiral, who finds himself frustrated at his inability to act even in his final moments. Later today, Admiral Rooke will pass away, uncertain what the future of the war will hold. And though he'll die confident that his command in the capture of Gibraltar was a crucial moment for British interests, at least for a time he'll never know just how impactful or long-lasting the repercussions of the taking of Gibraltar will be. The feat will influence both this war and Britain's wider naval plans. For several more years, the fighting in Europe will drag on, but eventually the Grand Alliance will emerge victorious. In 1713, the war will come to a close with the signing of a peace treaty in which Gibraltar will be formally ceded to the British. Following the Grand Alliance success in the War of Spanish Succession, Britain will enter a period of dominance over the seas, becoming the world's most powerful navy, a maritime supremacy upheld all the way until the Second World War, almost 250 years after the capture of Gibraltar helped give rise to Britain's enduring naval strength on August 4, 1704. Next on History Daily, August 7, 1974, performance artist Philippe Petit stuns the world by walking a tightrope between the World Trade Center's newly built Twin Towers. From Noiser and Airship, this is History Daily, hosted, edited, and executive produced by me, Lindsay Graham. Audio editing by Mohammed Shazib. Sound design by Katrina Zemrak. Music by Lindsay Graham. This episode is written and researched by Luke Lonergan. Executive producers are Alexandra Curry-Buckner for Airship and Pascal Hughes for Noiser.
Thank you for listening to these great episodes from History Daily. You can find History Daily wherever you get your podcasts. A reminder that if you can't wait for more Grey history, there's hours of bonus content waiting for you right now in the Grey History community. Furthermore, by donating a cup of coffee when main narrative episodes are first released, you can also enjoy early access to both The Death of Marat and The Cult of Marat. So don't wait, support the show today and enjoy all the perks in the process. There's links in the show notes and on the website. As always, thank you for listening. Stay safe and have a great day.